So check this out, fam. The United States is warning about a global disinformation campaign waged by China that may undermine peace and stability. The country that sanctions one third of the world's population, destroyed the Middle East, and provoking war with the nuclear power is accusing China of undermining peace and stability. All the United States does is project. The United States accused China of spreading disinformation while they spread claims of the Uyghur genocide without any evidence. The United States in this report is furious because China invited journalists from all over the world to inspect the so-called Uyghur genocide, and all the reporters come back and said the United States claim of genocide is unfounded. Even more damning to the United States claims is their own State Department lawyers couldn't find any evidence regarding the genocide of Uyghur Muslims in China. So because people don't believe their bullshit lies about China anymore, the United States is complaining about Chinese disinformation campaigns. This is a technique they use all the time. This is the same way the United States complained about Russian disinformation because the global population rejected Ukraine war and funding Nazis in Ukraine. Anyone who don't repeat United States neocon talking points is repeating Russia and China disinformation. Now you guys see why I say the United States is the most propagandized country.
What's poppin'? What's poppin', my friends, my family? Welcome back to another edition of Nick and Night. I have a fantastic show for you guys today. How ironic is it? And this is a Western tactic that they are complaining about Chinese disinformation. The same way they complain about Russian disinformation, they blame Russian disinformation for everything. Russian disinformation is the reason why Queen Hillary lost. And after Queen Hillary lost her election, liberals were so upset they are willing to plunge the world into World War III to get revenge for their Queen Hillary Clinton. So everything that goes wrong for the ruling class is Russian disinformation. Is that interesting? The same way you had Canada cheering for Nazis in Ukraine, a former Nazi veteran, and they shift the blame onto Russia. Justin Trudeau famously blamed Russia for the fact that they are a country that harbor Nazi war criminals. And now they're speaking of extraditing him because it was such an embarrassing moment, but they harbored a Nazi until he was the tender age of 98. The tender age of 98. And now they want to blame Russia for that. Now, the United States is losing their influence, or propaganda did not work the same way it used to. So now they're warning about Chinese global disinformation campaigns that could undermine peace and stability. The United States, of all people, is complaining about undermining peace and stability. And now, one of the reasons why they complain about this, because not only are they losing the war on public opinion regarding NATO and Ukraine, you have global left leaders, I'm going to cover this here soon, like AMLO, who just recently called out the NATO war, called out U.S. sending arms to Ukraine. You have Lula, a very influential leader, the leader of the largest country in Latin America, social democrat who's been very critical of the war. So the same way they're losing the war on public opinion on that issue, they're losing it on China. So one thing that they had in this report, because they made this bullshit report up, right? They are mad because their claims of the Uyghur genocide is not landing, it's not sticking, because it's a claim to have no evidence. Now, we had great guests. I'm going to bring my guests here soon, but I'm going to show you guys what most of the hoopla is about. So the United States keep lying about the fact that there is a Uyghur genocide, despite the fact that the quality of life and the life expectancy for these populations are increasing. So Beijing just invited journalists. They invite people to openly tour this quote-unquote Uyghur genocide, and they've been doing this for quite a long time. And every time they do, the journalists come out and say, well, I'm not saying it's perfect, but the claims of genocide is 100% unfounded. So you had, I'm going to read this part right here, and I'll bring my guests in. On a tour in late September, sponsored by Beijing, the 22 journalists from 17 countries, so different backgrounds, different countries, visited bazaars and chatted with residents over dates and watermelon slices. They later told state media they were impressed with the bustling economy. So better than what I said, actually, right? Because actually, a lot of these journalists will visit these areas, and they're like, "Man, it's actually crazy how well established and well firmed their community is." They describe the region as full of cultural, religious, and ethnic diversity. And they denounced what they said were lies by the Western media. And they said this is an example of what Washington sees as Beijing's growing efforts to reshape the global narrative. Why won't people believe us when we make up claims of genocide anymore? I don't know. It's almost as if we have eyes and ears in their internet that exist, right? So there are a lot of ways you can disprove the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims in China. One example is the is a thriving culture, a thriving community of the Uyghur Muslims. In fact, their life expectancy and literacy rate has skyrocketed. In the United States, Black people's life expectancy has gone down. So you guys understand, there is more legitimate claim for me to say that there's a genocide of Black Americans than there is to say there's a genocide of Uyghur Muslims. What is one argument that they use? Well, they are putting in forced education camps. You mean school? That's what it is. The same way we are forced to have public education, China forces public education on their population. So they have public education. They say, you guys are not exempt from public education. And then people say, oh my God, you're forcing them to have an education. It's so fucking stupid. Yeah, what's popping? Always great to have Andrew on. Andrew has a wealth of knowledge of global affairs, foreign policy, and activism as well. So it's great to have you back on the show. But we also have another esteemed guest, someone I love having on the show. Welcome back to RBN. Fantastic journalist, author, and host of the American Exception podcast. Welcome to RBN once again, Aaron Good.
Hey, thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Let's pop, my friend. So I want to start with Andrew first because I start with a little monologue and regarding the United States publishing this report, warning of this global disinformation campaign waged by the Chinese government. And one of the reasons why I say the United States is the most propagandized country in the world, because everything they do is straight up projection. So I want to I'll pass to Andrew first. Do you have any reactions to this story, the claim that China and Russia is perpetrating unique disinformation that is different than the United States? So Andrew, what's your take on this? And I'll pass to Andrew just to get started.
Yeah, well, I'll send a link real quick for a little bit later, but when I was looking at this up earlier today, I saw that CNN just started publishing a regular newsletter called Meanwhile in China, where they just compile a bunch of, barely or completely unsubstantiated propaganda about China. So
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Perfect example of the projection. And I think, we've gone into many times why, CNN, and you've gone into many, many times why CNN really should be considered state media. I mean, there's so many different intelligence officials and even kind of like semi-active military officials that are on all of these different corporate networks. But I mean, the main thing that struck me from the headline that you sent from the AP is that they're saying it could undermine peace and stability, which I think is by far the biggest lie out of that bunch, and also the biggest example of projection. I mean, other than border disputes, which have occasionally erupted into really basically just skirmishes, small armed conflicts, and when the Chinese came to the defense of North Korea, I can't think of any instances where China's even been involved in a war. I think that should be pretty obvious why that's a crock of shit to anybody looking at that.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad that you sent me that link because I'm going to get to this. This is the height of irony that they print this report and then the Guardian publishes this fake news. I don't want to spoil it. I want to get Andrew in here because it's funny that they're accusing China of waging disinformation campaigns, and the Guardian ran this, and the journalist who printed the story was called out for lying about this. and then she locked her account. And now instead of making a retraction on the story, you have CNN, Washington Post, the Washington Journal. They are printing this story uncritically for the people who are not watching, for people only listening. This is the story that's spreading today. China censored this photo of two athletes. Was it for a perceived Tiananmen massacre reference? Once again, the Tiananmen massacre, another disinformation campaign by the West, ironically enough. But it doesn't take much common sense to realize that no, China did not censor this. You can find this image all over social media. This is something that a Guardian journalist posted with no evidence whatsoever. But before I continue with those receipts, I don't want to spoil it too much. Aaron, I want to get you in. What's your thoughts on this blatant propaganda by claiming that Russia and China perpetuates in unique disinformation? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, this really goes back to the Cold War playbook. It's every bad thing out there is communist disinformation, or Soviet, Russian, Chinese disinformation. And if it's embarrassing to the United States, which really is the main disseminator of propaganda globally, when you look at the volume and impact of what it puts out. But there are the issue of the genocide that you spoke, or the alleged genocide, is just so absurd in that, as you point out, the population is increasing, the Uyghur population and the overall
It's a
population
weird genocide, isn't it?
in Xinjiang, and the quality of their lives, the quality of the life of life in general is improving over there by every measurable indicator. And so this is you have to take this into account. Now, there are issues with the internment camps that they had, or re-education camps, but these were a response to, and they did go beyond public education. However, they were a response to Salafi terrorism, and the crackdown that they have had on religion isn't that they banned Islam or anything else, because as reporters will talk about when they come back from the region, there are many mosques, and the Muslim culture is thriving there, and it's visible wherever you go. They did ban Salafi Islam, which, if you really believe in the principle of freedom religion, in an absolute sense, you could say, like, well, they shouldn't do that. But Salafi Islam is that's the Saudis' brand of it, sort of wacko fundamentalist Islam that really wouldn't even have the foothold that it does in Saudi Arabia if the Saudi royal family hadn't allied with these Wahhabi religious fanatics, and then gotten backing from the British Empire and then later the U.S. Empire to basically establish this orthodox, austere version of the Muslim faith that's really kind of crazy. And they promote it and they spread it in different places, and the Chinese saw it as a problem. I have to believe, knowing the way that the U.S. operates, that they use those same networks that they've used of jihadi bomb throwers everywhere else to stage those terror bombings and such in Xinjiang, which is what the Chinese government was really responding to. So that aspect always gets left out of the story, the fact that there really was terrorism that they were responding to. So that gets omitted entirely, and if that's omitted, then you're never even going to get into the bigger question, which we don't when we talk about Islamist terror in general in this country, which is the long history of the U.S. backing for the worst Islamist fundamentalists and terrorists, because these were a way for them to control the politics of countries in the Muslim world. They realized that they could manipulate these people. They preferred right-wing religious fanatics to socialists or nationalists, and so they've done everything to work with the local despots that they support in these countries to promote a kind of crazy version of Islam. And this is, we're in Xinjiang, we see a little bit of that combined with the way that the U.S. has tried to control Central Asia after the fall of the Soviet Union. So these are what the stakes are. But the biggest joke of all is that the Chinese would be interested in destabilizing peace somewhere in the world. Like, where's their peace that China is trying to disrupt? Okay,
Yeah.
Like, and where and how many wars, on the other hand, can you point to that the U.S. hand is pretty obvious to see? So, to the extent that one side is promoting war and conflict, and the other side is promoting peace, it's the Chinese that are more interested in like peace and commercial relationships and normal diplomacy,
Yeah,
and it's
it
the
was.
U.S. that wants to use warfare and destabilization and covert operations to maintain its control over its global empire, which is crumbling as we speak. And it's this is why the U.S. seems to be more and more kind of sad and pathetic and brazenly dishonest as it tries to cling to its control of global hegemony, which I think it's basically already lost.
Yeah, to your point regarding the concept of China undermining peace, it was China that brought Iran and Saudi Arabia together for a peace deal that effectively stopped the genocide in Yemen. It was China that proposed the Chinese peace proposal that was sponsored by many countries like Lula and Brazil, obviously Russia as well, that essentially called for respecting territorial sovereignty. As the United States export weapons and fill the black market with death machines, China is building forgiving debt. So they understand that they are losing this war on public perception. That's why they're printing ridiculous state media stories like these, where it said the United States warns of a Chinese global disinformation campaign, and then you have another one, AP is on fire. And I didn't even know about that until you told me that, Andrew. The CNN Meanwhile in China uh, uh, segment page they have. I got to peek that out more often. But look, the U.S. see China's propaganda efforts becoming more like Russia's. Now, if you believe that propaganda is unique to Russia, like the way that neocons and them are putting out there, you are a gigantic rube. Now, let's go back to the story that CNN and MSNBC is running completely uncritically. This is CNN publishing it. Now, the story at face value doesn't make sense here. So China censored this photo because there's a reference to the Tiananmen massacre, which is once again a U.S. propaganda story. Look at this hug here, and they said because the image captures 6 and 4 that some people could see as a reference of the date of the massacre. So they would censor that because of that. That doesn't make sense at face value because of two random numbers, two athletes hugging. So it was so bad that you have the Guardian author that published a story on Twitter, also the Guardian Twitter account posted the story, and they was community noted by Twitter. She was ratioed, called out by anyone who knows anything about foreign policy and geopolitics. So she locked her account down, and she was fact checked. This is what it said in the community notes. This image was not censored on Chinese internet. It could be easily found on platforms such as Douyin, Weibo, Baidu, and Suho. So you guys see how anti-Chinese xenophobia is so bad in this country? Established, deeply serious journalists, because I'm not a serious journalist, right? That's how Washington would view me. I'm an serious journalist. But she's a serious Guardian journalist, serious CNN news outlet that is publishing this story uncritically with no evidence. But Americans believe it because they are conditioned to believe anything bad said about an Asian country. So how many people are going to read this story because they're not on Twitter? How many people are going to read the CNN headline, the Washington Post headline I've seen about this? Well, go ahead, Google the stories everywhere. How many of those people are going to see this story without seeing the fact check and understanding that this story is completely made up? Meanwhile, they want to talk about Chinese disinformation. There is one more story. I need to move on for a second time, but
I'd also just add, Nick, that this
is
at the same time that the U.S. is ramping up censorship more than at any point in its history. I think, unless maybe you'd think of like maybe World War I compares to it, but they didn't have internet, and so it really couldn't be as oppressive a censorship apparatus, even though it came down really hard on certain individuals. Like, this is the ironic thing, is that they're doing this at the same time that the U.S. is basically saying, like, censorship is fine and we need it to protect the people. Like, they're trying to also have their propaganda cake and eat it too.
Isn't it? That's such a great point because they're pretending that China is this uniquely authoritarian censorship country. Meanwhile, you have the Biden administration that is literally taking a court case to the Supreme Court. You know, the court case that said that Biden was illegally censoring and cracking down on the First Amendment. Biden is taking that to the Supreme Court, and they're trying to argue that they have the right to pressure social media companies to fall in line and censor people. But they want us to believe that China is uniquely bad. Now look at this here. This person who was caught lying, and she lost all her credibility on the story. Look at her. Now this is something that we mention on the show all the time. They bring these people of Chinese descent, always the one that come out as the most unhinged China hawks and neocons. The same way Negroes in the Black Congressional Caucus are the biggest ones cheering for the Democratic Party and for war. It was John Lewis that punted congressional approval so Barack Obama can destroy Libya. So isn't it funny that, and I wanted to call this out because it's disgusting. These people sell out their own people for the war machine, and they get caught telling blatant lies all the time. Chinese coons are the highest order. That's what they are. I'm gonna see. I think I got one more. I might have to skim through these. Go ahead, Andrew. If you have anything else you want to, if you have anything else you want to add.
I just think it's such a funny fact check. It's so funny to now, like, Twitter's not really that different, but it's so funny that now you can just occasionally see things making a little bit of sense on Twitter, like that fact check. And that one's extra funny because Douyin and well, I don't remember the other three, but I recognize their names when I see them. I know Douyin, but they're like the largest social media platforms in the world. And for a reporter to think that they can get away with that, it's like, to some extent, they kind of can, because there's such a difference in the languages. I mean, there's absolutely nothing in common between, you know, the English or any other Latin alphabet and Chinese characters, and very few Westerners really speak good Chinese. So they think, well, we could probably get away with that. But it's also interesting. There's like, I think that's another reason that they want to ban TikTok and kind of clamp down on its content on other social media platforms, because there's this really funny pipeline going on where like stuff gets really popular on Douyin and then it's put onto like Instagram or TikTok simultaneously, and it's mostly like artists or musicians or whatever. There's no like Chinese propaganda ops going on Douyin. But it's just so funny. Like, it's such an easy thing to fact check if anybody wanted to. But yeah, people are caught in their little bubble. And most of her followers are going to think, oh, good, I'm glad she closed off her account to the riffraff. Now we can just kind of.
Yeah. They probably think it was Russian troll farms that was going after her. No, like she was getting ratioed and destroyed in this tweet. There's a Guardian tweet that got destroyed because, like, I don't have access to Douyin. I'm not too familiar with it. But even people that see my tweets that follow me, like, dude, we literally found this shit immediately. Like, it's so easy to debunk this nonsense. But once again, they repeat it because the American people have been conditioned to be so Russian xenophobic and anti-China xenophobic that they can be lazy. They can just say whatever and people will believe it. I'll just do this real quick because I don't want to cut off completely, to show you guys some more examples how this story about Chinese disinformation is pure projection. You have Politico, who was also fact-checked by the community notes for trying to whitewash the Waffen-SS and Nazis in Ukraine, saying that a lie can make it halfway around the world before the truth even gets its boots on. And the ongoing turmoil over Canada's parliament recognizing former SS trooper Yaroslav Hunka highlights one of the most important reasons why. And it was brutally fact-checked because Waffen-SS members had to swear allegiance to Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. Now, they're just another example of them trying to make Nazis and the enemies that we lay in bed with seem more compatible. Because Russia media and propaganda have all the reason to go ham at this story. It legitimizes their talking point that the West is pro-Nazi. And now, because of this own goal, now they're saying that the Canadian Parliament Nazi scandal fueled a Russian disinformation campaign. You guys see the pattern? Whenever we do something bad, it's not because our leaders, it's because of Russian disinformation. Anyway, I'll pass it to Aaron first. Any last thoughts on the story? I kind of went long on that first segment, but you guys have any thoughts before I move on?
What can you say about the Nazi thing? I mean, the guy was, part of the SS or whatever, and then they're trying to say, "Don't make this about politics," which it was about politics in the first place. Why are they even talking to the guy? I don't. The Ukraine thing is the most bizarre spectacle at this point because they have no chance. The only thing the U.S. could do would be to do something really, really stupid and suddenly aggressively escalate the U.S. presence there to the point that it actually threatened Russia, which would probably like elicit a nuclear response, and then we're all dead. This is very easy for me to. I just explained it right there. Basically, the contours of it. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen from the U.S. government, and that's saying a lot. This is so wild. The counteroffensive was more like, I mean, it's really sad because of these poor guys who are, didn't do anything to deserve this. The bulk of these people that are getting killed, but it's like the counteroffensive was like the mosquitoes counteroffensive against the bug zapper. Man, it's like there's no this is the most pointless waste of human life, and then Joe Biden is just carted up there, and if he doesn't fall down, he makes some asinine statement that nobody believes. I've never seen the U.S. empire in such a pathetic state, and I only worry that it's like a prelude to them just going totally off the rails and just blowing everything up.
Andrew, any last thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, when a really solid historian who's done serious work says this is the dumbest thing the U.S. has ever done, I think that's a pretty hefty statement. And yeah, I would just say one other thing, like Colonel McGregor was briefly, I think he was briefly in Trump's administration. One of the few. I mean, he's definitely kind of hawkish in some regards, just as like he participated in the war in Yugoslavia, for instance, and still.
He's not a leftist,
Well,
let's say.
yeah, let's say that he still defends aerial bombing of Yugoslavia, but at the same time, um, he's commented a number of times that the U.S. kind of still doesn't really get it in one particular sense, which is that they think that putting their troops there in this scenario would be a deterrent. They're still, riding Biden's early career and the Kissinger years as their kind of default mode of thinking, where they think that would really be a deterrent. And what McGregor has been saying a number of times, which I think is an interesting point, is that the Russians would probably love to do some damage to an American force that wanted to stick its fingers deeper into this business in Ukraine. I mean, they've already been kind of showing off a lot of the American mercenaries, and they claimed the other day that that they've taken out, and they've also claimed the other day that there was an all German crew running a Leopard tank, a completely German crew that was not there as mercenaries, but the Russians are claiming that they were officially there from the German Bundeswehr. So we're already in extremely dangerous territory, and Russia has been pretty clear. They're not going to just put kid gloves on because the U.S. and a Polish force and maybe some Lithuanians go into Western Ukraine and call themselves peacekeepers. I mean, that is clearly not going to be a deterrent. And I agree with Aaron. It's extremely dangerous. I think it could easily, it would easily result in a bigger war, if not a nuclear exchange, within a couple of months.